So, future of the CMS, we're here to talk about decoupled architecture, multiple front ends, and content as a service. My name is Todd Nienkerk. I'm CEO, co-founder, digital strategist at 4 Kitchens. We make big websites. We've made websites that you have used. If you read The Economist magazine, Entertainment Weekly, if you go to CNN.com, if you've been to NBC.com, if you used NBC's SNL app or website, Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, all of that is stuff that we helped build. In some cases, on decoupled architectures and hosting content in what we like to call content as a service environments. So this is intended to be a practical takeaway of some of the reasons why you might want to pursue a new kind of architecture and new ways that you can use Drupal. So today I want you to rethink how we manage, publish, and consume content. So everybody here deals with content across a wide variety of industries. This is exactly the right audience. Today we're going to talk about what decoupled means. Who here has heard of decoupled or headless or something like that? Cool. More importantly, who has not? All right, I'm going to explain it. Very cool. We're going to talk about when it makes sense and more importantly when it does not make sense, because it does not make sense the majority of the time. Then we're going to talk about all the cool stuff that's on the horizon, and there is a lot of it, and it's moving fast. Okay, so first let's establish for the purposes of this conversation what decoupled means. Most of you probably have a website that looks like this. Here is your content management system. It could be Drupal, it could be WordPress, it could be Sitecore, it could be Adobe AEM, it could be .NET Nuke, it could be all kinds of things. It is something that stores your content, maybe your users as well, manages your layouts, does a lot of other things. It's storing content on the back end and it's displaying that content on the front end. And here's what we mean by front ends. We might be dealing with desktop computers or laptops, tablets, mobile devices, RSS feeds, or some kind of way to syndicate that content outwardly to other services. And on the back end, we're managing stuff like a lot of text. That's still where we're at, a lot of text, but still images, audio, video, and of course, user-contributed content like comments or stories or just data, user data that you have to manage. So this is the world that most of us live in now. There's a new kind of world in which the front end is completely separated from the back end, where you're using a totally different software system than the back end. In this case, the front end is like the head. It's the thing that's publicly facing. It's the thing that most people see. It's the thing that looks around and engages. And the back end would be maybe the body of the site. And this is where the terminology headless comes into play, because you're removing the head, the front end of the site, from the back end, decoupling the two, making them two completely different systems. So you might have Drupal on the back end or WordPress on the back end, and then on the front end you're using something like maybe just static pages that you generate, or you're using Node or Angular or Meteor or Backbone or something like that to display the content that's stored in the software on the back end. Now most people think that the front end equals the web, right? The front end of your site is your website, full stop. Well, in fact, your website is actually one of many front ends that we all use and interact with. There is your website. There could be native applications. You could also be working with things like now Google AMP. If you have timely content or any kind of news cycle whatsoever, Google now really wants you using separate pages for AMP. You might be working with feeds, so you need to syndicate content outwardly or just make it accessible through a reader or aggregator. You might be working with screen readers as a separate kind of content delivery system. And here's where this is important. So when most people think of screen readers, they think of stuff like accessibility tools. So if you are blind or if you can't see particularly well, or you need assistance, an assistive device of some sort, then a screen reader is something that parses a website and reads that text aloud to you and highlights certain links vocally. Well, isn't it silly that we're relying on an inherently visual medium that then has to be parsed by a completely separate software system to read that to people who cannot experience that visual medium? Wouldn't it make a lot more sense if we could just send that content directly to a screen reading device? Guess what we already are. It's on our phones, it's on Amazon Echo, it's on all these devices that just read the content aloud, right? It's already happening. So screen readers are things you probably already use in a way. Gaming systems are more and more adopting content from the web. Smart TVs and streaming devices like Apple TV, Roku, things like that, Alexa, Amazon Echo, and Amazon's voice interactive system. So this is actually the world in which we live, where your website is actually one of several front ends, and the content should be stored ideally in one single back end, and it's all connected through an API. So in this new world, all of these front ends in green here are first-class citizens. It's no longer your website that is the first-class citizens, and then everything else has to somehow be interpreted from that, or scraped from that, or read from that. These are all first-class citizens, and content is at the core of what we're doing, not necessarily the software that is powering your website. This is what decoupled really means at its core. Any questions about that so far? Cool. So when does it make sense? Rule of thumb, it doesn't until you can prove it can. So let's talk about some cases where it is useful. There's some seats right up front. Don't be shy. Don't worry. I won't be scared. It's cool. So decoupling makes sense when you want to adopt cutting-edge front-end technologies. One of the biggest criticisms of Drupal is that the front-end cycle, now with the development of ubiquitous mobile apps and new experiences and devices, that the development cycle of Drupal, and pretty much any CMS really, is way slower than the market, right? Way slower than the market. So you want to start adopting these cutting-edge front-end technologies to take advantage of things like VR, or touch, or Alexa, but most CMSs can't because they're way behind. It takes years to go through the development cycle. So when you look at something like, let's say Drupal 7, for example, because I hate picking on Drupal 8. Let's pick on Drupal 7. Drupal 7 has a safe, repeatable back-end system and architecture with known solutions and expected results, right? Safe, proven, we've got it. Same thing with the front end. At the time it was originally developed and released, safe, repeatable, you knew exactly what you were getting. Guess what? It's PHP template. We all kind of know it. I don't know if we love it, but we know it, we understand it, we know how to work with it and do overrides and stuff like that. The problem is, from a new experiences point of view, this is boring, right? You're not getting new experiences from this. You can't easily adopt something like React or port your content to new devices and experiences. So we could swing the pendulum all the way and say, okay, I want to use the newest, hottest thing. Like, what is the JavaScript library that's cool today, right? Not what's going to be cool tomorrow because it'll be something different, but what's cool like today, right now. Well, you have a backend that's using all this bleeding edge technology, not really proven. Maybe you're in government and you're worried about things like security and it hasn't passed certain security protocols or tests yet. You will have a rich experience, but you're also dealing with high risk and high reward. Same thing on the front end when you adopt brand new technologies that have not yet been proven. Well, the thing is, while there is high risk and high reward to using brand new technologies, it's very dangerous. Because your website has to at least perform on the back end. It has to be stable, it has to be secure, it has to scale. But there's a Goldilocks approach. You can decouple your systems and use a proven technology on the back end, but do all the really cool stuff on the front end by using a totally different technology. So on the back end, it can be safe and repeatable. You have known solutions and expected results. And on the front end, that's where you can do all of the bleeding edge technology, rich experience, high risk, high reward. And it's just right. That's the first reason why you might want to consider decoupling. Second, if you want to separate your upgrades from your redesigns. So we're all familiar with the following pattern. It's time to upgrade your website. Drupal 8 just came out. Okay, we have to do a full migration from whatever. It could be WordPress, it could be Drupal 6, it could be Drupal 7. It's going to cost so much. It's going to require us completely rewriting the front end anyway, because from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, we've moved from PHP template to Twig on the front end, have to completely rewrite it. May as well do a redesign while we're there, right? How many people have thought that phrase at some point in the past? While we're at it, we may as well do a redesign, right? Well, now you have to lobby your stakeholders or your client or your organization or whoever for a pretty substantial capital investment in completely redoing every aspect of your website while you're in there, right? So when you're coupled, you kind of roll this boulder forward every 2 to 5 years, and it's painful every time. So you've spent all of this money and your own personal capital and your reputation to try to do these upgrades, and then you're kind of stuck for 2 to 5 years, and you're like, okay, we're going to wait for the next version of X to come out, and then we're going to do a big old upgrade and redesign. Well, this kind of sucks, right? This means that in those intervening 2 to 5 years, all this new stuff comes out. Maybe a new version of iPhone, maybe VR becomes a thing in 3 years, and you just launched your brand new site and suddenly it looks dusty and weird, right? Because it can't do VR, whatever that means, we don't know yet. So when it's coupled, you have this boulder problem, this big thing that you're rolling forward. But if you decouple, first you do your setup. You're going to have to launch the new backend and the new front end. But then you can better prioritize the expenditures. You're not going to spend less. You'll probably wind up spending marginally more, but you can do so in a more strategic and phased way. So here, when you upgrade to Drupal 8, well, Drupal 8.5 or 9 comes out at some point in the future, you don't have to completely redo the front end because it's not completely changing the front end technology, and you're using a completely different front end technology anyway. So then you can kind of like, rather than one giant boulder, you can move the things in pieces, right? You can move your digital strategy forward piece by piece and do an upgrade and then a redesign and then an upgrade and a redesign. So you always have something going on, but you're not having to think about a giant project all at once. If you want to keep pace with front-end technologies, first it's Backbone, then Angular, then whatever. Well, you do your redesign, and then you think, well, that was neat. We hired a new developer. This new developer hates whatever we launched it on. We're going to turn it into Angular because that's what they want to do. That's what they know. Great. Okay, that person left because they went to go work for whoever, Facebook, and now this new person loves React. Let's switch to React. Okay, well, now Backbone and now Ember. Then you upgrade your CMS, and now there's Polymer, right? But you can do this more incrementally and more cheaply. And when you're dealing with things like JavaScript libraries on the front end, you're fundamentally dealing with front-end technologies that more people tend to know and that has a more focused skill set. So JavaScript, CSS, HTML, right? A lot of people know those three. They don't have to know PHP to do this approach. They don't have to know the inner workings of Twig or Drupal or anything because they're just given an API that gives them some content and they get to design that content from a feed that they're given. Now let's think about this from the perspective of multiple front ends and experiences. So you launch your new website, it's decoupled, cool. Now let's do our iOS app. We don't have to create a separate service or a separate content store for your iOS content. It already exists in the backend that you built, and you can access it through an API. Then you can add Roku, then you can maybe redesign your website. Then you can do an upgrade of your CMS. It doesn't affect any of the above. You might have to rework a little bit of the API or the glue that connects it all together. And then, hey, Amazon Echo's big. We have, we're in retail. People want to be able to shop by just talking to their Amazon device. Let's add Alexa. This is exactly the kind of pattern that big media organizations like NBC follow. So that's the second reason why you might want to decouple. 3, when you want to eliminate tension between a design and a CMS. So how many people here at some point have a design background and are given specs on what to do, right? How many times have you thought or been told, if you're on the other side of this equation, the CMS doesn't really work that way, right? Here's this design. Oh, it doesn't really want to do that. And I don't know how to explain it better than that, right? It just doesn't want to. Like it has a will that it wants to impose on us, like it's a sentient thing that's preventing us from doing cool stuff on the web, right? So I just had a whole idea. I'm going to have to write that down later. Okay, so in this case, you have your design, right? And your design wants to go in one direction. It wants to do one thing. A great example would be, and this is a real-world example, we partnered with a design firm many years ago to relaunch a K-12 Common Core curriculum education site. And the designer had all these great ideas about inline editing of fields, right? Next to every field was a little pencil icon. And that indicates, you just click on that and you edit that field right then and there, right? But Drupal doesn't want to do that, right? Drupal wants to do a big node load and node save, right? That's what it wants to do. So then we had to explain to them, we can have an edit tab and you can edit everything all at once. And they're like, no, we really need a better user experience. I'm like, okay, that's going to cost you a lot of money because nobody's invented that yet. All kinds of organizations have tried. I think finally maybe Acquia has made some progress in this area, but man, it's been years and it's tough. It's tough to do and it's tough to standardize because there are who knows how many hundreds of types of fields in Drupal and different ways to customize it and how those data may work or be validated, right? It's really, really tough. So you have to do it field by field. It's very expensive. So the design was pulling one way and the CMS was pulling the other, and it's kind of like, who's walking whom here, right? And that's because fundamentally, there are two philosophies of designing for a CMS. There's CMS first. And at Four Kitchens, we started primarily as a tech shop. We were tech implementers first, and then we started adding design and user experience and content strategy and all of these other things. But our roots are in technology. So we have this perspective of, let's make things like affordable and maintainable and scalable and sustainable, right? That's our approach to everything. So we feel that the user's needs are important, but there are all kinds of different ways we can satisfy them, right? I mean, we can fudge a little bit here and then maybe make some improvements on the back end there and still have a good user experience. But the goal is we will probably have to change the design if it's made by somebody who doesn't understand the CMS that they're designing for, because frankly, everybody is designing for a CMS. We're going to change that design to align with those natural behaviors so that the end result is easier and cheaper to maintain, minimizing custom code, maximizing reusable components like modules, and best standards, best practices. So we want to have something that is technically easy to maintain and hand off to the internal team or to our support team or to another vendor that might take it over in the future. That's the CMS first approach. Then there's the design first approach. And guess what? A lot of companies with roots in design tend to follow this approach. They say that the user's needs are paramount and non-negotiable. We have done the research. We know for a fact this is the best way to do it. This is going to return the best ROI in terms of sales or people filling out voter registration or whatever the goal of the site is. We have to do it this way. We've proven with numbers that this is the way to do it. Must be executed in the following way. And it may involve hacking the CMS or creating a really complicated code base, which of course affects maintainability. The thing is, neither philosophy is wrong. It just depends on which thing you value more. Are you willing to accept having more maintainable custom code in order to enhance user experience when you're working within the framework of a CMS that wants to behave a certain way? Decoupling allows you to potentially satisfy both because you are now separating the user experience in the front end from the back end entirely. So if you're finding yourself in that situation where somebody is saying, well, we need to use insert content management system here, such as Drupal, we have to for whatever reason, but we also have to have this really fantastic user experience that we've tested, that we've vetted, that we've run the numbers on and will work and will convert. But we also don't want a really complicated code base that we have to maintain. You can actually just build them in two separate technologies. That's another reason to decouple. Still another is if you want to centralize all of your content in one place. So let's take that hub and spoke thing that we looked at earlier and think about it from a slightly different angle. So rather than thinking about it in terms of multiple experiences and devices, let's think about it as a whole ecosystem of different websites and departments and people, stakeholders. So those of you who work in education or if you work in a large bureaucratic corporation, you are probably very familiar with the following model. So you might have your website, let's say you're in strategic communications. Your job is to marshal all of the content that's happening across an entire university and make your university look really good and really cool, right? Tell all the stories about the research and the accomplishments and everything that's happening. So Sarah's got a website, Frank's got a website, Laura and Bob, they all have websites, right? And they're all little islands on their own, and they're probably all running different content management systems of varying versions and degrees of quality and all kinds of stuff, right? It's really hard to be strategic communications in this world because everybody's publishing in their own little silo. And all of the coordination is human. It's all email and phone calls and Slack or whatever you're using to say, hey, that's a cool story. Can I publish that over here? Okay, great. That's a lot of footwork, right? And it really could be automated. So let's turn that idea on its head. Let's say that my strategic communications website, which is supposed to be the hub of most of the content at the university, is decoupled. So I have a front end that is reading from one content hub, one database, content hub. And then Frank and Laura and Bob and Sarah are all also connected to this content hub through an API. In fact, the same API that could power an iPhone app or an Alexa app or Roku or anything. It's the same concept, just now we're talking about different people endpoints instead of device endpoints. So here's what that looks like then. Let's say Sarah is, she works at the law school, and I work at the med school, so law and med, right? Sarah publishes a really interesting article on the effects of the Supreme Court decision to allow gene patenting. So that gets sent to a content hub because she publishes on her site. It's connected to this content hub. The canonical source is Sarah's site. All the metadata on the pages say that Sarah is the canonical source of this content, but it is also sent to the Content Hub. And I, as one of many departmental publishing representatives within this university, occasionally visit this Content Hub. Maybe there's a dashboard, or maybe there's a notification system that tells me, hey, Sarah just published something and tagged it law and medicine, because it involves genomics, right? Well, I'm in medicine. I might care about that. I go check out the article, and I think that would be really cool on my website, too. And I check a little box, and it gets published on my site. Now, Sarah, made a mistake. Case law was a little wrong. There's a modification to the story. It's very important. Citation was off, something like that. She makes a change. Well, that change automatically gets sent to the Content Hub, where it is then automatically updated on my site without us having to communicate at all. Because Sarah doesn't necessarily know that I published her story on my site, because we have this whole system set up. So rather than me having to keep track of potential changes on my own manually, this system might facilitate that kind of change. That's another reason why you might want to decouple. Let's say you want to publish to many front ends and experiences, and I want to underline experiences, simultaneously. So here we are again, we're looking at devices. Now let's say I publish a text-based article. Pretty standard kind of thing, blog post or something like that. Well, there are certain experiences where that very particular text-based article might make a lot of sense. It won't make sense in all cases. It won't make sense to send a text-based article to a smart TV or Xbox or something like that. But, we can selectively send this piece of content out to certain experiences or devices. Let's say we have a piece of video content. Well, that video content might go out to various sources, where it makes sense. But here's the problem. Video, even if it's closed captioned, is not a fully accessible content experience. If you make video that is heavy on infographics or animations that prove a point or illustrate something or demonstrate how to do something like a screen capture, if you are visually impaired, that video is of no use to you even if it's closed captioned. So instead, you might need to have a separate audio track that is an explanatory audio track, or a transcript that outlines in detail what somebody might see in an infographic, or just completely turns the narrative on its head for a totally different experience, then you might want to have some kind of accompanying transcript or material or audio track that is then sent selectively to certain devices. Right? Now, a great example of this is there was back in the Laserdisc days, there was a trend for a while of providing a separate audio track. This is the first time that home entertainment consumers could actually experience multiple audio tracks. There were audio tracks available in a lot of classic films, like The Graduate, I know, was a film that did this. You could switch to this audio track, and it had a very quickly speaking narrator who would explain visually everything that was happening on the screen. So there's that famous scene where Mrs. Robinson puts her leg up in the front of the frame, and Dustin Hoffman says, Mrs. Robinson, I believe you're trying to seduce me. Now, the visual cue of what's going on is completely lost on a visually impaired person, right? They don't hear the leg appearing in the frame, right? They don't know exactly what's going on, and they don't know why he is being seduced or what is going on in that scene. But instead, the narrator is saying, Mrs. Robinson quickly lifts her leg, speaks this in between the lines of dialogue, and it's fascinating to listen to. If you want to hear this today, check out Daredevil on Netflix. Daredevil is a blind superhero, so of course they wanted to make a blind superhero fully accessible to blind people. You can listen to the action track of Daredevil on Netflix, where they say, punches are swung and the mist envelops the frame and Daredevil is down for the count. They narrate the fight scenes, and it's really it's like a radio drama. It's really cool. That is an example of publishing to multiple devices and experiences through selective types of media. Let's say you have to integrate multiple backends or services. So it's not just all about front ends. It's also about pulling in a lot of information from multiple sources. So the hub and spoke model could look something like this. I'm sure we have all at some point had to deal with something like a third-party video service or off-site search like Google Search Appliance or Solr, OpenCalais, which is an automated tagging system, and it does natural language understanding to try to categorize the content that you're working with. It does that automatically. You can do that too. It doesn't have to be all outward-facing. You can have multiple endpoints to the content that then decorate the content with metadata. So this is another reason to decouple. And this is my favorite example. Let's say you want to make your content easily accessible through an API. Now, we've already made an API, right? Those are the gray lines, right? We have an API that can take your content and send it to these various devices or experiences. But what if we want to have a public API, something that's publicly documented, that anybody can access the data raw? Well, the two big use cases for this might be if you have a big community, a lot of fans who want to interact with your content in new and unique ways. I'll give you a case study in a moment. Or if you work in the government sector, education, and you are compelled to, or ethically you should, make your data accessible publicly, this is a way to make that happen. So the same API that publishes all of your multiple experiences can also help you comply with regulations, or to get people to do work for you for free, such as This Week in Tech. So this is a site we relaunched about 1.5 years ago. This Week in Tech is a major podcast, videocast network, hosted by Leo Laporte, twit.tv. What you see here is a headless Drupal site. It's powered on Drupal, but what you see is the output of a custom, of course we had to go and make our own, node-powered JavaScript platform called Saucier. We're the web chef, so everything is like, get it? Okay. So Saucier is a node-powered JavaScript front end built specifically for Drupal. That's what you're seeing is the output right here. But that's a Drupal site. And I want to say in Leo's words why they decided to do this, because when they first came to us, they said, we want to do a redesign, and we just want to make our site like easier to use, and we want to be able to better organize our content. That's all that they said. But when we started to dig in about what their ambitions were in the future, how they have multiple podcast streams, they want to be able to mash them up in new and interesting ways all the time. And because Twit, This Week in Tech, is primarily facing a tech audience of developers, everything from Android developers to ham radio enthusiasts and drone racers and all kinds of people, they wanted their stuff to be available on every single platform, like weeks within that platform even being announced. Right? Because they have to be cutting edge. They are This Week in Tech. They have to be cutting edge, both in their content and how their content is consumed. So we thought, well, nobody has the budget to do that. You know, even our biggest clients don't have the budget to hop on these new technologies constantly. So what if we follow this new decoupled model and we give you a publicly accessible API that allows your fan base to use your content as real world content to noodle with? So if they're doing let's say they create a new video stream just about Alexa, and a bunch of people start listening to Alexa, and they say, oh, by the way, all of this stuff is available through our API, and you can experiment with it on Alexa, and let's see what you can do, right? Those fans can just start playing with it. And they have. If you go to Apple TV, just as an example, and search for Twit, you will see multiple Twit-based applications built for free by their listener and viewership. So here's why they decided to go headless. And I don't normally read slides, but I'll read these because I think Leo put it really, really well. First, it's faster and easier to create new sites when you go headless. Web design styles change faster than high fashion, so it's nice to be able to update the site without redoing all the hard work on the back end. Number two, having a complete API would make it easier to do apps. The app, just like the website, would have access to everything there is to know about Twit in a simple, accessible fashion. And by making the API public, we encourage members of our audience to create new things, things we might never have thought of. You could even design a website you like better. True. Abstracting the content from the presentation seems like a big win. And four, by keeping Drupal simple and avoiding third-party modules, very few, it's just content, we can make a more secure and reliable backend that will be much easier to upgrade when future versions of Drupal arrive. So when Drupal 9 comes out and they ask, is that module available? They won't actually ask that question because they aren't using any modules. They just upgrade to the new data scheme of Drupal 9. Have a bunch of links. I'll get to these later. So let's review. Decoupling makes sense when you want to do the following: adopting cutting-edge front-end technologies, separating your upgrades from your redesigns, eliminating the tension between a design and your CMS, centralizing your content, publishing to many front ends and experiences through multiple forms of media, integrating multiple backends or services like OpenCalais, Solar Search, third-party video, and if you want to make your content easily accessible through an API because you think it'll be neat or cost-effective or because through regulation you have to. Okay. I have deliberately set aside a lot of time for questions or discussion, but first I want to talk about what I think is happening next. First, we're already seeing a huge focus on content coming first. A whole other thing that I haven't even talked about, by the way, that totally plays into this is stuff like Facebook Instant Articles and Apple Newsstand, and all of these can be fed directly into those services through an API, right? Like the possibilities are kind of endless. So everything is focusing on content. Current CMSs really manage the website first and the content second. When you first log into the admin area of a lot of CMSs now, the first stuff you see is things like, here are all the errors, and here are the things you need to upgrade, and here's the users, and all, look at your layouts and all of this stuff. That's not content, that's website management stuff. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that philosophically. But really, content should be first and website management should be second. Content strategy, of course, is a requirement for absolutely all organizations, and a lot of content strategists and a lot of editors really don't like working with Drupal from a user experience standpoint. So we really need to focus on the user experience of content input and management. We spent a lot of time this go-round in Drupal focusing on switching to Twig and end user experience, and that's important and that's good. But we still haven't conquered the editorial experience. We're working on it actively now as a community, but that's something that's actually really holding us back. I see another big focus on content modeling, and the difference between content strategy and content modeling is really like content strategy is more the creative and messaging and marketing side, and content modeling is the technical side of content strategy. Content modeling means a blog post has a title, a body, a couple of ads, it has metadata associated with it, byline, publish date, retire date, updates, things like that. That's all content modeling, and you have to understand those fields, and then also how pieces of content relate to one another. The author field is likely a link to an author page that then lists recent content or a bio or something like that. Content modeling is the relationship between all of those fields and different types of content. And I also see, lastly, within content comes first, a full divorce of content from its presentation. We're already seeing this with third-party services, content as a service platforms like Contentful, Prismic, places where people go to write, edit content, manipulate content completely separate from the presentation layer. There is no presentation layer with Contentful. You have to build your own, and it's connected through an API. We have to design for experiences, not just devices. So when the whole mobile revolution thing happened around 2007, 2008, there was a lot of like device, right? We're thinking about devices. But something that kind of got lost, I think people like us in this room were aware of it and we were doing this correctly, but I think the broader public kind of got swept up in device like fetishism, is that with the device comes a different experience. Touching content, right? Rubber banding of pages and what it's like to kind of shift things around and how links need to be easier to tap and these basic kind of UX things when you're dealing not just with a small screen, but instead with something that has touch. And now we have depth of touch on the iPhone, right? It's not just tap or double tap or long press. There is a force associated with that. That's an interesting experience. What can we do there? I don't know. I don't think Apple's doing it right yet, but it's kind of neat. So it doesn't mean that responsive isn't important. It's that we have to think about how people are experiencing things. I'll give you an example of how we also got it wrong. I don't know if anybody else here thought this, but I'm guilty of saying this. So when the whole responsive thing happened several years ago, we started doing a lot of trainings at various events like DrupalCons and things like that on like how to make your Drupal site responsive and RWD best practices and stuff like that. And there was this example that I kept trotting out about how like, okay, so mobile device, let's put yourself in the context of a mobile user. What is that like? You're probably walking down the street and you're late for an appointment. You're trying to find the address of the place that you're going to, or you need to get a phone number to make reservations at the restaurant or something like that. And we all kind of had this idea, or at least I did, that mobile users were people on the go. They were people who were actively mobile. Does anybody here know when people use their phone the most? Sitting and watching TV. Multiple screens. Often your laptop is next to you, right? It's sitting in the empty seat next to you, and you're kind of slumped on your right, and you're doing this, right? And there's the TV going. That's how most people actually, nobody's in a hurry, nobody's looking for an address, right? It's silly. So that's the idea of like getting more caught up in like what we think the device is for and not what the actual experience is. And we need to gut check ourselves on that. We need to look at data about how people are actually using things. Front-end technologies are accelerating and CMSs can't keep pace. I mentioned this earlier with one of the critiques of big enterprise content management systems like Drupal, and WordPress does this too. They all do. Release cycles are just too slow. Release cycles are a lot slower than both the invention of new devices and experiences and the front-end technologies that support and utilize them. So as a result, content management systems really do need to double down on the C, on content. Focus on having a great editorial experience, content experience, and then have your front-end experiences be more nimble. Experiment there, don't experiment on the back end of stuff. I mentioned that content management systems are often more website management systems. Well, we will see a rise of website management systems, and I'm just coining this. This isn't a thing. Maybe somebody will pick it up and use it. WMSs, right? Stuff like Squarespace, Wix, Weebly. Maybe there's a totally different service where you're managing your users or social network interactions or something. This stuff is going to really pick up and leave the content stuff alone, in my prediction. We are already seeing a return to smaller static websites. So how many people here work within an organization that supports multiple technologies, web technologies of varying degrees of complexity, such as Drupal to WordPress to static, right? It's becoming more and more common because it just doesn't make sense to spin up an enterprise-level CMS for a landing page or an event that takes place in 3 weeks, and you need to do some quick promotion and register some people, and then you archive it or you take it down, right? Just make it static. Back in the day, we used to be like a co-located company. We're now distributed. We were headquartered in Austin. And we did a DrupalCamp Austin every year until DrupalCon came to Austin. And we skipped it that year, and then we never really kind of hopped back on the boat. But other companies have taken it up, and there's a DrupalCamp Texas, and there's some other things that are happening. But that last year that we did it, which I guess was 2012, I forget, we launched our DrupalCamp Austin website on Jekyll. Right? Yeah. Like, why fire up a whole Drupal thing and do all the connections and the e-commerce and the whatever? It's complicated, man. You know, building an e-commerce site, like, we did Jekyll and we said, there's Eventbrite, and if you want to make submissions, there's a Google spreadsheet. And it was great. And there were like 2 people who called us out on it. I guess they thought they were being clever. And then the very same person who was complaining about it on Twitter was one of the organizers of Nicecamp, and Nicecamp is no longer running Drupal. So there you go. So there's a return to these small, I'm not saying I'm right, I'm just saying it's a pain. It's a lot easier to just do a static site. And it's totally acceptable to do something like that. Like this event used Eventbrite to register. Eventbrite's a great tool. Let's use it. Jeez. Why install Drupal Commerce to handle all that stuff? It's complicated. Content modeling, content hubs, things like that, make stuff like atomized content or reusable content really, really easy. So I'll give you an example. And for those of you who work with a lot of regulatory content or in universities, university is a great example. Let's say there's a lab, and the lab gets a big grant, and part of that grant means that you have to rename the lab. So now it becomes Samantha's lab, right? Because Samantha gave $1 million to the lab. Well, you have hundreds of pages on all kinds of different content management systems and things all over the place that talk about what used to be Samantha's lab and now needs to be called Samantha's lab, or Samantha's going to get mad, right? Because I gave you $1 million. You should call this, you should name this thing after me. For Stanford Dean of Research, they had exactly that problem. We built, using Drupal's token system, a way to tokenize a lot of reusable content on their site. And this is before all the decoupled stuff. So we would have, for the names of major offices or labs or even entire paragraphs or pages of regulatory text, we would have just a little square bracket token ID, and it would call another node. And that node was, it could just be a word, it could be a phrase, it could be pages of information. And anytime that appeared, it would just spit whatever was in there into that blank. So when they had to change the name of the Office of Dean of Research, they could do it in one place system-wide, and it would all update simultaneously. They could also do it with big chunks of legal information or regulatory information, disclaimers at the bottom of every safety page saying something about, eyewash safety or whatever it is. When you're dealing with lots of content like that, it's really nice to be able to make it reusable, atomized, tokenized. So that's another way that you can utilize this approach. Okay, last two things are like the wacky ones. Conversational interfaces. There's so much to say about this and also so very little. Most people, when they think about conversational interfaces, they think of two things. They think of Siri, OK Google, Alexa. You're talking to a computer. Or you think of chatbots. Chatbots are so hot. They're so hot right now. Everybody wants a chatbot. Chatbots are, that's a whole other thing. I'm very frustrated with chatbots because they have a lot of promise and they're not doing anything cool yet. They're all just a bunch of decision trees. It's very boring. But conversational interfaces will be a thing. Absolutely, 100%. They are already a thing. Do you know how the majority of younger, I'm going to say younger, I'm not going to use the M word, younger people use search on their phone? Care to guess? They speak into it with a question. Google is already a conversational interface. How many people here ask Google questions? What are the results of the election? Right? That's a question. It's using natural language understanding to figure out our sentiment and deliver results to us that are accurate. It's already happening, right? And it exists because AI is a real thing now. It's because there are all kinds of cool... remember when Google, this was probably about 10 years ago, Google added that little microphone next to search, and everybody laughed and laughed and laughed. Like, why would I ever want to speak a search into my computer? That's so silly. You know what they've been doing for 10 years? Tuning it. They've been using us. They're tuning their algorithms, right? And they have the best NLU system in the world. Puts Siri to shame. That's why everybody here is annoyed with Siri. That's why Siri it activates when you're in the middle of a phone call about whatever. I was listening to NPR, and NPR was doing a story on Syria. And it kept going off, right? Chatbots, fun thing about chatbots. So I kind of I poo-poo them a bit. But there are some really interesting applications. I think there are three kinds of chatbots right now. There might be more in the future, but the three kinds are essentially content. It's a content delivery and interaction system. A great example of this is a Facebook Messenger chatbot called Purple. I think you can look it up at getpurple.io or something like that. It's a politics bot. Purple, red, blue, right? Get it? So Purple is a way for them to deliver conversational style stories about the US presidential election and other down ballot races in a really interesting way. It's not monetized. I have no idea who makes it. It doesn't even say on the website who makes it. I don't know what's going on. Who's making money? Nobody. So if you're a content producer, chatbots are really kind of odd. It increases engagement. Hooray, but for what? So that's the first kind. Content. Second, transactional. Alexa, put eggs in my shopping cart. Right? Done. That's transactional. I need to do something. There's a chatbot called Abe, A-B-E, like Honest Abe, Abraham Lincoln, for Slack. And it is a personal finance manager for Slack. It's Mint, but in Slack. So you can tell it to do things. You can tell it to transfer money and do whatever. That's a transactional bot. The third kind is the interesting kind. I don't know what to call them, so I'm going to call them mediators. So they're mediator bots. This is where it actually gets cool. So there is a service. They recently rebranded. I don't know what they're called now. Used to be called Don't Make Me Pay. Don't Make Me Pay was a parking ticket avoidance system. It is a fully AI system. I think you take a photo or you just upload some details about a parking ticket that you got somewhere. And if you are in a supported city, it will automatically fire off letters to the city disputing the ticket. And in most cases gets it wiped. And then I think in exchange you pay a much smaller, like $5 or something, right, to make the parking ticket go away. It's now a chatbot, and you can just text it and say, I got a parking ticket over here, and it'll just make it go away. It's mediating things. There's also the personal assistant aspect of chatbots. You know, there's I think it's called X.AI. You have to sign up for a preview. X.AI is, and I love this, like it makes my life so much better. It is a service that has the following conversation. We should set up a call. Okay, great. When are you available? I'm available this Tuesday from 2 to 4 and 6 to 7. Also Wednesday from this time to this time. Friday is kind of wide open. Okay, person replies, well, those don't work for me. How about Monday the following week from 2 to 3? Okay, that works for me. Great. Schedule it. It is a bot that does that through email for you. It's incredible. And they talk to each other. 2 X.AI bots can talk to one another, and things just get scheduled. It's crazy. So conversational interfaces have to be built on content fundamentally, and it has to be well-modeled content in order for it to work. And it can still be powered from the same content hub and the same API. Just because I think the stuff is neat, one other idea. So in Star Trek where they say, computer, bring me, show me the results of what are the engine output or whatever, right? Think about how that's happening. Like not there's a computer that can understand the language. No, there are microphones everywhere listening to people all the time, waiting to be activated. Apple is teaming up with major home builders around the nation. There will be microphones in our homes, in every room, listening to us all of the time for us to tell it to do something. Just something to think about in light of yesterday's DDoS attacks. Virtual and augmented reality. This is the fun one that is just like, yeah, but really? Yeah, really. Yeah, really. This isn't Dactyl Terror from the 90s. This isn't that weird VR race game from the 90s. This is the real deal. It's super cool. If you haven't messed with it yet, go to a Windows store. It's the only reason in the world to go to a Windows store. Go to a Windows store, play around with the HTC Vive, do the 3D painting demo. It's awesome. Not only is it awesome, but it raises all these questions about what does content look like in a 3D fully immersive environment? What does the web look like in a 3D fully immersive? I have no idea. But we know for sure that 360-degree video, panoramic photography, all of that kind of stuff is totally possible. The coolest thing I saw for HTC Vive was a system that could automatically stitch together photos of any three-dimensional environment by somebody. You don't have to be a professional photographer. You can walk around with your phone or an SLR or something, and you just take photos. Just walk around and take photos. Upload it to the system. Fully immersive, three-dimensional photoreal environment of stitched photos that you can wander around in. And the really cool part, you can shrink yourself down super small or make yourself very big, right? There's a really great demo for the HTC Vive where there's when you first land in this world, there's a little bowl of potato chips, and then you turn around and there's a bowl of potato chips. And you get to crawl under the chips, and it's really neat. So, and that's just done by somebody doing some photos. So that stuff is happening. What does that mean for commerce? What does that mean for retail? What does it mean when virtual reality becomes augmented reality and there's a pass-through camera on the front that can see everything that's actually happening in the world, and all it's doing is layering some stuff on top? You're going to get something that's going to look a lot like that. Who remembers that from Fight Club? That's real. That's a real thing now. Also, let's say you want to take a look at a sofa and see if it fits in your room. Well, you just select it from a bin and you throw it in the room. Oh, I don't like it there. I want to put it over here. Huh. Is there enough arm room? Yeah, okay, that looks good. I'm going to order it. Right? I think IKEA actually has already put together a 3D VR environment for shopping for their furniture. Now, I don't know if it does that. I don't know if you can pick it up and move it around, but you can do this. Did I want to say anything else about that? Yes, one last thing. Just a couple weeks ago, I haven't looked into it yet because it's so new, Google finally announced Daydream. So Daydream is Google's entree into the VR world. What's interesting about it is, who played with cardboard when it came out? It's kind of goofy and phone would fall out and ha ha ha, and it's like a Viewmaster. It's this, but it actually straps to your head. It has headphones. It has a tiny little remote, like a touch remote, probably Bluetooth powered. And of course, every phone has a camera on the front that is visible, right? So everybody has accessible, non-device specific, like a certain company that will burn your face off if you use their phone strapped to your face, which I don't know where that's going to go at this point. You can use any phone, and it's a fully democratic platform. They want to Androidify VR, make it easy and accessible. Something to think about. It's going to happen super, super soon. Questions? Yes, sir.
Did you see about the U.S. government open sourcing their Facebook chat bot?
No.
Yeah, it's the White House.
Okay.
Yeah, it's another one of the political type ones, but the whole thing is so that people can ask questions of their political officials across any country that wants to implement it, and it can interact and answer questions and do all that stuff.
It can absorb policy and make statements on behalf of the, like that kind of thing? Like, what's your stance on whatever?
I don't know exactly what the content that it would serve is, but
okay.
But I read the purpose was for more open government. And then the Google Assistant on the new Pixel phone and everything is more like a more conversational, powerful Google Now type of
Gotcha.
chatbot.
Excellent. Okay, that's cool. I'll look into the government thing. That's really neat. Thank you. Yes, sir.
So one of the features in traditional CMSs and Drupal and enterprise is that a lot of users want to also, when they're publishing content, they also want to define the layout, right? They want to play around with the layout. So you can do that with panels in Drupal 7, right? So in the scenario that you described in decoupled scenario, where does that happen? Like, is there a separate JavaScript app where they need to log in and use a separate interface to first publish content and then log into another interface and then move it around, drag and drop and
potentially, yeah. I haven't come across that specific instance because most of the clients that we work with, especially for systems that we built here, have pretty well-defined layouts and templates and things that they want to do. And there's some degree of flexibility where they may want A, B, and C, but having full customization is something that they're not particularly interested in. Plus, you can deal with a lot of that through the actual content management part itself by specifying, for example, where ads should be inserted or where pull quotes get added as atomized pieces of content. So each paragraph can be a piece of content. You can kind of sort them out in that way. So I don't want to say that that's a way around it. It's just a different way of thinking about content. So to really answer the core of your question, content and its presentation layer should be completely separated, so that you might manage it in something like Drupal or Contentful or WordPress, but then whatever you use on the front end would be a totally separate experience where you're configuring, well, I want to move that photo over here a little bit, or I want to make it bigger or smaller or something like that. It would probably be a separate environment.
It would be completely separate, and the other option is, which might not be the prevalent, with the content also send some sort of indicators like, some HTML, something which the JavaScript app can consume and get some ideas.
Exactly.
To be placed somewhere on the page, right?
Exactly. There needs to be some indication. And the reason why, to explain the philosophy of why I think those things should be completely separated, is that whatever your experience is as the person doing the layout will not be the experience that pretty much anybody else is going to have. They're probably not going to be looking at it on the same device you are. They may not even be looking at it at all. So the idea of like, well, I really want it to look like exactly this, and I want to click and drag these things in exactly these spots, is like, well, that's cool for that one case.
It's limiting.
It's very limiting, right? So the idea is really to think more about how content should flow and where things should be inserted, rather than how exactly they should be laid out on a page as if in print. And that actually raises the whole question of web to print and how that becomes really interesting with these ideas. Totally doable too, exported as XML, throw it into InDesign or something like that.
There are a lot of improvements with D8, especially the latest versions, with caching and personalization. So with the decoupling model, how do you create a high-performant website that still handles personalization?
Sure. Good question. I don't have an offhand answer for that because we haven't had to do that specific combination of tasks. I will say that one of the more interesting setups I've seen with NBC, they actually have 2 Drupal instances running, and neither is fully responsible for the front end. So there's a Drupal instance that I believe absorbs a lot of the content and manages a lot of the content and metadata, and is sort of the decorator for the core content, which is actually stored in a completely different database. So it passes through Drupal, gets decorated with metadata and all these other things. Then it gets sent through a variety of other sources. I think it then goes through a second Drupal layer for more of a presentational decoration, like that's where you could, for example, add some of the content personalization and suggested content and all of that. But then it could then be output again either in that Drupal instance or in something completely different through feeds. So you might be just adding more data to feeds, like here are the 5 suggested content pieces, and we want the block to appear below the second paragraph. Right? That can all be done through a JSON feed or something like that, which is then interpreted by a custom front end. So I've actually seen people do, that's a super complicated version. I've seen people do a double Drupal thing where it's, here's my Drupal backend and here's my Drupal front end, and that's how we decoupled. And you kind of think like, why not just make it all one thing? It's for scalability purposes and for being able to better segment it could be for security, it could be for the roles that are the people interact with. So if you're doing purely admin stuff on one version of Drupal and then it passes through to the public-facing Drupal where subscribers have user accounts, for example, that's a reason why you'd want to do double Drupal. But it's a thing I've seen. I think we have one more and then I'll be out in the hall and we can talk forever.
I didn't really touch on this. What about progressive decoupling? I've seen some talk about progressive.
Help me understand what you mean by that.
DrupalCamp had a blog post on using decoupled blocks.
As like inserted content that...
Right. I can't remember the full context of it, but it was mostly arguing for progressive decoupling versus full decoupling. I think maybe Dries may have touched on some of it as well.
I'll have to look into that, actually. I'm not super familiar with it. It sounds to me, my gut reaction to it is, it sounds like a modern interpretation of edge side includes for scalability purposes. But that I'd have to look into that a little bit more. It just strikes me as being a way to solve that, but I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to research that for the next version.
They weren't arguing for full decoupling. They wanted to still use more of the Drupal stuff on the front end.
Yeah.
But allow you to also be able to pull in something like Angular and React.
Oh, I see. So you mean managing some of the content that's typically associated with display like blocks.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's very compelling. And I think that in that case, I mean, I'm just theorizing at this point, so I need to read the article on it. I think you could do that within a single Drupal instance and say, here's my content, here's some blocks, and here's some views, and here's some stuff. And then we're going to let Drupal do its view stuff and its block stuff and all of that. But then that'll just be a chunk of HTML that then gets thrown into a feed and then displayed through a custom front end or something. That sounds totally valid to me. That sounds like a smart idea, especially if you're used to Drupal and using blocks and all of that kind of stuff. Cool. All right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.